This is part of a context. We're talking this morning about keeping our heart in the right path. That's the statement out of this passage, out of the chapter. But I was thinking about paths, and I said maybe this example would be helpful to us just in applying the thoughts we're going to have today. It's just, for many years, every summer, I took a group of high school students from the city to the mountains to the Sierras for their first backpack. I would do that every summer, sometimes a couple times a summer. I would do anything to get in the mountains myself, so that was a good reason to go. But I do know from that experience in the Sierras particularly that it's easy to get lost in the rugged mountains. And there is a path that's been formed out, shaped, and rocks in place, and you follow this path and you're going to get to your destination safely. If you leave that path, it can be pretty treacherous. The drop-offs can be 1,000 feet, and the flight might be fun, but the landing would be painful, I think, or maybe not at all. But I just remember I had one young man who used to backpack with me a lot, and he went on a backpack himself, and he decided it would be faster to get to the other side of the mountain by cutting his own path. And he soon found himself helplessly lost for 3 days and 3 nights. Oh my. He thought that his life was over. And in that part of the country, there are mountain lions, and there are any snakes at that altitude, but there was enough things to be concerned. Bears, another concern for his own safety, but he was lost. The rangers eventually found him, and he's out and about today, still living life, some would say recklessly, others with a lot of energy and excitement. But I say that only to say this, that there are paths, and there's good paths, and there's paths that don't take you where you want to go. And that's what this passage today in chapter 23 addresses, the choices we have in life in choosing the right path or the wrong path. And the writer of these Proverbs, statements of wisdom that we're going to read about today, we're here to help be guidance to you, to a young man in this case, that he would be able to stay on the right path. And, we find that scriptures often liken the spiritual journey of faith to a path. Matthew in his gospel recalled the words of Jesus when Jesus addressed some 5,000 people on the mountainside. It was known as the Sermon on the Mount. It's recorded in Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7. And at the end of the last chapter 7 is there, we have a verse 13. Jesus said, in regards to coming into relationship with God, he said, "Enter through the narrow gate. For wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction. And many enter through it, the broad gate, the broad road. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it." And I said, so there's the statement that Jesus was making. There's two paths. There's a broad one that's going to lead to destruction, and there's a narrow one that's difficult that's going to lead to life. And you want to be on the right path. That was his encouragement in the statement here. There's a book that was written a long time ago called Pilgrim's Progress. If you're not familiar with it, find it, read it. It's the story of a young man named Pilgrim. And the analogies are clear all the way through the book about the struggles that we face as believers in Christ and living our life here. And it's the paths he chose and all that was a part of his life. The Pilgrim's Progress, maybe a helpful piece that would parallel the things we're going to be learning here today. We'll see here in chapter 23 the two paths in life, the right path, the wrong path. One path is found with wisdom, the other with foolishness. That would be the narrow path with wisdom and the broad path with foolishness. One is found with humility, the other with pride. One is found through surrender and the other through rebellion. And so just to know that the statement in this text, keeping your heart on the right path. Being on the right path is a heart issue. It's not just a mental one that you decide about behaviors, but it has to do with what's in your heart. And what I sense, and I want to honor God from my heart. I want to live my life in a way that's an honor to Him. That's what's in my heart to do. And I said, when that's the guide, there is a sensitivity to the Spirit of God that you don't have when you think you're in control. There's a relationship with God through His Spirit, trust in Him, that guides us. And we'll read more about that as we come here today. Remember, I mentioned last week that chapters 22, half of 22, chapter 23, and chapter 24 were written by somebody else, not Solomon, but Solomon chose to include these thoughts in his writing. It was added on to the tail end of his scrolls. And the wise man, whoever that might have been, or it could have been more than one person, I guess, but the implication here, the structure of the sentences, the grammar, the words that were chosen would seem to indicate it was the same writer. But the wise man who wrote chapters 22 through 24 says in it that he provided 30 wise sayings or proverbs. And he put this wisdom in more of a narrative form rather than the bullet parables that we've been reading from Solomon. But in this narrative style, it's more easy to understand what is being said and understand how we can apply it to our life. The first 5 Proverbs that he wrote were in chapter 22. That's what we looked at last time. And today we're going to be looking at the Proverbs he wrote 6 through 18. So there's 13 new thoughts that we're going to gain from chapter 23 here today. And I would say that verses 1 through 9 in chapter 23 can easily be understood in one context, and that is eating a meal with a wealthy, corrupt king. And how do you conduct yourself in that kind of context? Verses 1 and 2 instruct us in what to do. Verse 3 is about what not to do. And as you'll see, I've color-coded your text again. The green would be things that I had perceived would be actions that you take that would keep you on the right path. And red would be like a stop sign, stop. Red would be the things that are actions to avoid. And so I'm just going to mix those two. And then there's gold that's in here, and that's just statements concerning wisdom in general. But so I'm looking here at verse 1. And this is number 6 of the wise sayings of this man. When you sit to dine with a ruler, note well what is before you, and put a knife to your throat if you are given to gluttony. Do not crave his delicacies, for that food is deceptive. So I'm looking at it, so what is the proper, I'm in the presence of royalty, of a king, a ruler, who's corrupt. And how I got there in the first place, know your own heart, and you will find this as we keep reading. But if you find yourself sitting and dining with a ruler, pay attention to what's going on. It says, note well what is before you. Be aware of your context. It's not just a meal. You're here with a ruler who's got an agenda of his own that will always be to his advantage and not yours. So he says, note well what is before you. And he says here too, says, put a knife to your throat. Now, this is not a literal statement, I don't believe. I don't think you would go to a dinner time at a king and have the spread and pick up a knife and hold it to your throat. I think the implication here is guard your appetite. And I say that because of the statements here. If you are inclined, if you're given to gluttony, if you're inclined to eat more than you ought to, or more than you need to, guard your appetite. Put a knife to your throat, so to speak. That would say, careful how much you eat. Just guard yourself in what you're doing. And then, but those are two things to do. Know what's before you and guard your appetite. But then it says in verse 3, do not crave his delicacies, for that food is deceptive. And the implication here is that the king invited you to this meal for a reason that's deceptive. He wants to accomplish something with your presence here in this meal that's going to hurt you, that you're going to end up paying for. So do not crave that food. Actually, that's probably pretty good advice in any kind of context. There's some foods I really love. And some foods I'm really drawn to. And some foods that just don't work my appetite at all. But it's good not to crave. It's good to appreciate and to temper how we eat. But that's just advice for good path, wrong path. We're looking at verse 4, and this is the beginning of verses 4 and 5 are the seventh of the 30 wise sayings that was given here. Do not wear yourself out to get rich. Have the wisdom to show restraint. Cast but a glance at riches, and they are gone, for they will surely sprout wings and fly off to the sky like an eagle. His saying here is pretty simple, and this is even in the context of being in the presence of a rich king. Don't be attracted by what the wealth he has. It says, do not wear yourself out to get rich. There's a statement in Psalm 127. It is vain, it is of no value to stay up late and get up early and work all day long, for the Lord gives you even while you sleep. And the point being, you can put all this energy in life, physically, personally, into something to achieve something, when God has already promised to care for you. So there's reason for well, what is the statement here? Have the wisdom to show restraint. I think now that my wife has heard that, I'm going to hear that phrase again. Because I have more energy than I ought to have, I guess. I don't know what it is in life, but my energy is not to the focus to get rich, but my energy is to accomplish things that I think are important, that are right. But have the wisdom to show restraint. So the negative side, don't wear yourself out trying to get rich. And then the positive, the right path, is show restraint in how you live your life. That's the advice that's here. And then cast but a glance at riches. Note it, but don't be drawn by it. For they are gone, for they will surely sprout wings and fly off to the sky like an eagle. And we find parallel thoughts in the New Testament that Jesus recorded saying something in Luke chapter 12. That Jesus said to the group that was around him, watch out, be on guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. You are not what you own. What's interesting, the more you own, the more it owns you. He told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man produced a good crop. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And there I will store all my grain and all my goods. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. Careless, Jesus would say. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with anyone who stores up things for himself but is not rich toward God. In a parallel passage, the Apostle Paul instructed Timothy, it's in his first letter in chapter 6, for we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. People who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap, and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge men into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. And just a few verses down from this, beginning in verse 17 in chapter 6, 1 Timothy, command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. In this way they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of a life that is truly life. The eighth, a wise saying of this wise man, begins in verse 6. Do not eat the food of a stingy man. Do not crave his delicacies. For he is the kind of man who is always thinking about the cost. Eat and drink, he says to you, but his heart is not with you. You will vomit up the little you have eaten and will have wasted your compliments. I think that's a pretty vivid picture. But careful, be discerning in who you spend time with and you invest your life with. And in this case, the stingy man, the greedy man, the one who really is not generous, though it looks like it, he will put on his show. Eat and drink, he will say, but his heart is really not in favor to you or for your pleasure, for, to do good for you. And that will never end up with a good result in the end. I summarize that by just saying guard your heart in the attraction of food that's only found on the table of the wealthy. I read one person's comment about this verse. He says that don't even accept the hospitality of this kind of person. Decline. Don't spend time with him. And very similar, and likewise, he said to avoid the fool. The ninth wise saying here is also in verse 9, by the way. And do not speak to a fool, for he will scorn the wisdom of your words. And he continues with, don't participate in the theft of property of the poor and vulnerable. In verse 10, the 10th wise saying, do not move an ancient boundary stone or encroach on the fields of the fatherless. For their defender is strong. He will take up their case against you. And the boundaries, the property boundaries, were established by a stone, setting of a stone. From that stone to that stone to that stone, this land in here is mine. Those are boundary stones. And Jesus here is, or in this, and it's not this case Jesus, but the wise man that was here, he said, don't touch the boundary stones of someone who's vulnerable, the fatherless. The implication is someone who doesn't have much and can't protect themselves. Don't touch them. It says, for they have a defender. And there are two things to consider with the word, for their defender is strong. It could be a relative who is powerful, who's going to, don't mess with the stones. That's my cousin, or that's my aunt, or my uncle, or whatever. But it could be a relative who is strong, and he will take up the case against you. You're going to be in trouble. Or if there is no relative as such, according to the scriptures, God is our defender, and God's the one you're going to answer to for the theft that you've taken place. Says to avoid that. And the next verse to come, in verse 12 that's coming up here, we find that the whole thrust of the wise sayings that are here turns primarily from avoiding the wrong to primarily the pursuit of the right path. And verse 12, apply your heart to instruction and your ears to words of knowledge. Always be a learner. Stimulate your curiosity. Be asking the questions, why, how, what. Always be a learner. Apply your heart to instruction and your ears to the words of knowledge. Always seek to grow in what you know and what you understand. That will always serve you. I have found in these last couple of years, the whole issue of COVID-19 virus and the things that end up in print, in the newsprint, things that end up in the news, things that end up in conversation between people. Put all those things on the table and sort what is true and what is just thought, imagination, or like a good explanation, but it's not grounded in anything that's tangible, that could be tested to say, is that a true statement or not? And I said, my world at least has been full of misinformation. And I said, so where do you even go to get good information? And there are times when the places of authority don't look very credible because of how they conduct what they do and the things they say, the expectations. It's like we have a disease. Oh, it was manufactured in a laboratory, and it was spread around the world, and it is really the whole thing is sinister and it's intentional. Well, could be, but nonetheless, there is a biological something out here that's making people really sick, and if they're not strong, they don't live through it. And so that makes me say, well, I think whatever it is, I'm going to be cautious about this. If I'm driving down the freeway and I see a whole bunch of red taillights coming on up in front of me, I'm going to slow down because I'm anticipating there's something out there that I should pay attention to. It's the same thing with COVID. But the problem, the real question here is, am I dealing with what is true and knowledgeable? And so that's why I'm saying, always be people who are learning, seeking to understand, to know. Be a learner, be curious, be an observer, be a listener. Welcome discipline in your life that corrects the way you think, the way you act. And provide discipline to those that are close to you, to those that you have authority with. Verse 13 speaks to that. Do not withhold discipline from a child. If you punish him with a rod, he will not die. Punish him with a rod and save his soul from death. And they said that we live in a culture today, and I don't know how you raised the two boys here, without discipline, in our society today, we have a majority of people who don't have confidence in the path of their own life. They don't know what is right or wrong. And so they make their own assumptions. And if it's profitable to them, they get proud and say, I chose the right way. You know, but there's been no guidance in their life that tempers the self-direction, the rebellion that we all came with. Born into this world with that rebellion. And so this statement, don't withhold discipline from a child. If you punish him with a rod, he will not die. Punish him with a rod and you save his soul from him. Correction is valuable. We've read before here in other Proverbs that were given that in Hebrews chapter 12, that whom the Father loves, he disciplines. Because he cares about it. And that's the point of this in verse 13. In 13 and 14. And in verse 15, another wise saying, this is the 12th one, by the way, he says, my son, if your heart is wise, then my heart will be glad. My inmost being will rejoice when your lips speak what is right. And he's saying, you want to honor your parents? Then nurture a wise heart. And let the things that come out of your mouth be right. Paul, in his letter, made a statement. He says, let no unwholesome word proceed out of your mouth, but only that which builds up the other. Kindness, speaking kindly, goes a long ways. I can say something that's firm and hard and fixed and do it in a kind way. I can do it in a respectful way. Or I can just be mean. You know, I said those are choices we have. But he said, what will honor your father and your mother is if you live with a wise heart and if you speak the things that are right. He goes on in verse 17, a warning to avoid envy and to pursue the Lord. Let not your heart, in verse 17, let not your heart envy sinners, but always be zealous for the fear of the Lord. There is surely a future hope for you, and your hope will not be cut off. Listen, my son, and be wise, and keep your heart on the right path. And that's where I took the title from for today, Keep Your Heart on the Right Path. But again, this is one of the few negative statements in this section, almost more than a third of the chapter, that's geared to the positive, choosing the right path. But this is one of the negatives. Do not let your heart envy sinners. I don't know how that applies where you are. Someone who's given to greed, given to accumulating, and does it fairly well, they have more than you have. They have the kinds of things you would like to have. They live their life with freedom and without boundaries, and that looks really attractive. They can do and say whatever they want, and that's there are things that we know already in observing life are headed to destruction, but the path really looks, it's like a statement I heard. Someone said, I have no need to be a millionaire, but it should be fun for a while. There's that envy that floats in our life, in our mind, that I said that just guard our hearts from the envy of things, simply from the envy of things. Guard your heart to value relationships. Guard your heart to value a relationship with the Lord and with your family and with the people around in your life. But always be zealous for the fear of the Lord. Always be driven to find the things that respect God, that honor God in your life. That has been a standard that's been helpful to me in living life. And I said, when I have a choice of behaviors that both seem, plausible, that it's okay to do this or not, but asking the question, will this honor God, makes the decision often a lot more clear. And I said, I may benefit from this decision, but it's not going to honor God. It's not a good call for me to do. Always be zealous for the fear of the Lord, respect for Him. For there is a future hope surely for you, and your hope will not be cut off. When the intent of your life, the value of your life is to honor God. And then he says, listen, my son, and be wise. So how do you gain wisdom? Talk to Dad. Ask him questions. Ask him ask how he handles something like this in his life. Ask him for his wisdom, his counsel. Ask Mom for her wisdom and for counsel. And listen. Listen and be wise. And guard your heart. Do you remember the proverb, chapter 4, verse 23? Above all else, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life. It's one we memorized. Above all else, guard your heart, for out of it comes life. I find in that same chapter, 2 verses down, chapter 4, verse 25, let your eyes look straight ahead, fix your gaze directly before you, make level paths for your feet, and take only ways that are firm. Do not swerve to the right or to the left. Keep your foot from evil. Keep focused in your life. And be careful not to be distracted to the left or the right. Or guard, be aware, be conscious of where you're headed. And often asking the question, where's this going to take me? And is this where I want to be? Is this where I need to be? Is this what will honor God? In verse 20, we have the 14th of the wise sayings here. Do not join those who drink too much wine or gorge themselves on meat. For drunkards and gluttons become poor, and the drowsiness clothes them in rags. I don't know if you have experienced or observed in life someone who's given to alcohol and see how sad that is. He says, oh, he has a problem with alcohol. He's an alcoholic. He can't help himself. It's a disease. I said, how do we get started? I said, just guard your heart. Do not join those who drink too much wine or gorge themselves on meat. For drunkards and gluttons become poor. And that's all the result of a lack of discipline and a stubbornness in the mind that says, I'm going to have what I want, regardless. I know I'm going to have a hangover, but I don't care. This is just too much fun. Well, you're fired. You don't come to work drunk with a hangover. So, I didn't think of that consequence. Maybe it's not so much fun after all. So, the point is, stay away from drunkenness and gluttony. Verse 15, listen to your father. Again, he says, listen to your father who gave you life, and do not despise your mother when she is old. Respect your parents, seek their counsel, honor them with what you do. Verse 23, buy the truth and do not sell it. I didn't know truth was for sale. I think the point in this is that if you're going to spend something, Spend it in an investment of what is true and not what's a lie. Or something that is solid and has value as opposed to being empty, or maybe might have value in the future. Buy the truth. Value truth. Value what is honest. And don't give it up. Don't sell it. Hang on to it. Get wisdom, discipline, and understanding. Again, those phrases, those words have surfaced all through the Proverbs for us. Invest yourself in honesty, wisdom, and understanding. Verse 24, the father of a righteous man has great joy. He who has a wise son delights in him. May your father and mother be glad. May she who gave you birth rejoice. This is the third time now in this chapter that the wise man has said, honor your parents. Listen up. Allow them to have great joy in you and delight in you. Both your father and your mother. And it's interesting that this is repeated here for us in this chapter, but it's also the fifth of the 10 great commandments of Exodus 20. Honor your father and mother, for with it is the promise of life. Honor your father and mother and live. Verse 26, my son, give me your heart and let your eyes keep to my ways. Open your heart up to what I have to say. Watch what I do. Now, that may be difficult in some family contexts because dad is not someone you're going to want. You see the destruction of his own life, and you see how he lives his life, and say, I got to learn from this. I don't want to mock him or disrespect him, but I don't want to make some of the same choices he's making that are the wrong path. But in this case, the wise man who is speaking is speaking with wisdom and common sense. So you do have to guard who you give your heart to and who you follow in the ways they live. But the illustration that follows on this is, for a prostitute is a deep pit, and a wayward wife is a narrow well. Like a bandit, she lies in wait and multiplies the unfaithful among men. I think the wise man in making this statement is just saying, son, keep your heart close to mine, and watch how I live my life. There lurks out on every corner an opportunity to do something that will be destructive in your life, and don't go there. He's just saying, be conscious of the fact that not everything around you is pure and positive and profitable. Guard your heart from a prostitute. Like a bandit, she lies in wait to steal life from you. So in verse 29, through the rest of the chapter here, 29 through 35, is the most vivid description of drunkenness I have ever seen in print. Who has woe? Who has sorrow? Who has strife? Who has complaints? Who has needless bruises? Who has bloodshot eyes? Those who linger over wine. I'm going, I've seen this before. Those who linger over wine, who go to sample bowls of mixed wine. Wine testing. Do not gaze at wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup, when it goes down smoothly. In the end, it bites like a snake and poisons like a viper. Your eyes will see strange sights, and your mind imagine confusing things. You will be like one sleeping on the high seas, lying on the top of the rigging, waiting to fall. They hit me, you will say, but I'm not hurt. They beat me, but I don't feel it. When I wake up, so I can find another drink. That was not a point of wisdom to you. That was a point of, the wise man in making his statement here is, this is the end result of one who lingers over wine, and the one who drinks too much. So I asked the question, how do we stay on the right path? And I go back again to a proverb that I learned as a kid. It's a plaque on my wall. So how do we stay on the right path? Proverbs 3, verses 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, God, and He'll make your path straight. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Whatever the context, situation you find yourself in life, trust the Lord in that one. I have to keep being reminded of that. It's usually until I come to the place where I'm beyond what I can do. I'm helpless. Then I turn to the Lord. He said, the wise thing to do is trust in the Lord with all your heart, in every context. And don't lean on your own understanding and how to make things happen or how you understand things are. Trust in the Lord. Do what He says. Follow His commands. Follow His instructions. Don't lean on your own understanding. But in all your ways, acknowledge God. Acknowledge His presence. Acknowledge His involvement. Acknowledge His resources. Acknowledge His grace and His mercy. Acknowledge Him. Recognize and acknowledge Him. And when you do, He will make your path straight. You'll be on the right way. That's how you keep your heart right, on the right path. Trust in Him. Acknowledge Him. At the end of the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 7, it says there, Jesus made this statement, therefore everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew, and they beat against the house, yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rains came, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell with a great crash. So what's the difference between the house that stands and the house that falls? They both listen to God's word. The man whose house was built on the rock practiced what God's word said. He did it. And the man whose house fell was the man who heard God's word but didn't practice it. That was the conclusion of the Sermon on the Mount for Jesus. Practice what you know. I've said that we've read over and reflected over 300 parables so far. They all sound wise, like common sense. But we live with a corrupt heart, bent on its own way, its comfort, and its pleasure. We'll come that way. So how can we attain to the counsel found in Proverbs? I keep coming back to the statement of Jesus. He makes it plain and difficult. He said to all of his disciples, if you want to follow me, deny yourself, take up your cross daily, die daily, and follow me. Set yourself aside. If it helps you, John in his gospel recorded the words that Jesus shared the night before his crucifixion. Jesus made the statement, he says, I am the way, I am the path. Got it? I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Jesus is our way, He is our path, and when we pursue Him, we'll be on the right path. Draw near to Him, talk with Him, read His Word, Learn about him. Learn about yourself as you read the Word. And the Spirit of God will teach you, guide you. I thought it was interesting in Acts chapter 9 that the followers of Jesus were soon recognized as the followers of the way, the path. Jesus, who is the way. They were called the way. May that be true of us. I thought it was interesting too that in Acts 11 it says that they were first called Christians by the outsiders who observed them. And the word Christian means little Christ. I say, how do we guard our heart? How do we keep on the right path? Pursue the Lord. Trust Him. Lord, your word is here for us. Help us to understand it and apply it in our daily life and in the decisions we make. Help us to move from our heart, Lord, to nurture our heart, to guard our heart. That may we walk in openness and tenderness and receptivity to you. That our life might reflect you. Thank you for that privilege. We come in Jesus. Amen.